What happens to a soldier when the battle ends? But the war inside him never does. And what about the war dog who fought beside him? What becomes of him when his service is deemed no longer necessary? In a dimly lit auction house in Montana, a battered German shepherd lay discarded, his past erased by those who once relied on his unwavering loyalty. Labeled as damaged goods, he was on the brink of being forgotten forever. But when Ethan Walker, a Marine haunted by his own ghosts, steps forward to claim him, neither man nor dog realizes they are about to embark on a battle far greater than any they faced before. As dark forces begin closing in, determined to keep secrets buried, will Ethan and his newfound companion find the strength to fight back? Or will they both be silenced before the truth comes to light? Join us in reflecting on this true story. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell notification for more daily stories like this. Share your thoughts in the comments and let us know where you are watching, for we would love to hear from you. In the dim light of a county auction house just outside Missoula, Montana, time seemed to freeze. The old German shepherd lay unmoving on the cold concrete floor, his scarred body whispering a tale of untold suffering. Once a proud military dog, he had been reduced to a trembling form that barely lifted his head as people gathered to bid on animals slated for uncertain fates. Unkind voices circled around him. Damaged goods. Someone muttered. He's not worth a dime, added another. The auctioneer's voice cracked with desperation. Start the bidding at $50. Anyone? Laughter rippled through the crowd until the sound of a chair scraping against the floor commanded silence. A young man, Ethan Walker, stood up from the back row. He wore a well-worn Marine Corps jacket, and his face carried a haunting look. Despite the jests and stares, his tone remained firm. I'll take him, Ethan said, cutting through the mocking whispers. No one there realized that this single moment would alter countless lives. Ethan was 34 and had seen more than a share of brokenness. His calloused hands hinted at physical work, but it was the distant look in his eyes that revealed the deeper toll of combat. After returning from his last Marine deployment 3 years prior, he found it hard to stay anchored in daily life. Loud noises made him flinch, sleep evaded him, and his grandfather's small ranch in Montana became both his haven and a lonely prison. Each dawn, he rose for coffee, tended the few horses left on the ranch, and tried to chase off memories that haunted him. The local VA called regularly, leaving voicemails he seldom returned. Medications lined a dusty shelf, unopened. That morning, his routine changed because of a local paper's classified ad. Former military dog, aggressive, final auction before euthanasia. Those few lines ignited an anger in Ethan he had not felt since Afghanistan. When he arrived, the dog lay in the center of the auction house, under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ethan saw the raw wounds, the dull fur, and the protruding ribs. These details told a story of abuse that violated everything Ethan believed military service dogs deserved. It was more than mere neglect. It was a betrayal of an animal that had once stood on battlefields in service of others. Claire Thompson, a local veterinarian, observed from a corner. She had tried to intervene on the dog's behalf, but was thwarted by bureaucratic hurdles at every turn. She watched Ethan approach the German shepherd with careful, measured steps. While the crowd ridiculed, Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the dog. In those hollow, distant eyes, he recognized the same emptiness he sometimes saw in his own reflection, a silent acknowledgement of lives upended by war. The paperwork was swift, a liability waiver, $200 payment, and no questions about the dog's history or Ethan's ability to care for him. The casual nature of it all disgusted Ethan. How could a military service dog end up auctioned off with less ceremony than a piece of worn-out furniture? He's yours now, the auctioneer grunted, sliding over a cracked leather leash. Good luck. Ethan approached slowly, aware of the tension coiling in the dog's muscles. It wasn't mere aggression. It felt more like dread. He crouched at a respectful distance and spoke softly. I'm Ethan. I promise I won't hurt you. Claire stepped up to mention that the dog had been labeled 0, as if he had no value. Ethan felt a surge of anger. "We'll find you a better name," he murmured. The German shepherd lunged suddenly, his jaws snapping within inches of Ethan's neck. A gasp rose from the onlookers, but Ethan did not flinch. In the split second their eyes locked. Ethan saw not a beast, but a terrified soul. For reasons no one around them quite understood, the dog stopped just short of making contact, then slowly backed away. "He's dangerous," someone hissed. "Put him down." But Ethan quietly stood. "He's coming home with me," he said, with a finality that caused even the most skeptical witnesses to hush. Loading the dog into the truck was not easy. The shepherd refused to move. Instead of dragging him, Ethan sat on the floor, talking softly about the ranch, the wide open spaces, and their quiet dawns. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the dog took a few steps forward, halting and watchful. When they drove off, Claire Thompson and a few staff watched, caught between relief and apprehension, never imagining the impact this bond would have on them all. The drive back to Ethan's ranch took nearly an hour. With every bump in the road, Ethan could sense the dog's unease. When he finally turned onto the gravel driveway and cut the engine, twilight had already settled over the Montana sky, painting it in shades of lavender and gold. Ethan had prepared for the dog's arrival as best he could. He set up a corner of the old barn, layering straw and leaving out fresh water and dog food. But as he opened the truck door, the German shepherd, still half-crouched in the back seat, refused to budge. His eyes darted between Ethan and the open field, muscles taut and trembling. "All right," Ethan murmured, voice low. "Your call." He stepped aside, giving the dog space. As if gathering what little courage remained in his battered spirit, the shepherd leapt out and stood in the open, sniffing the air. The first night tested them both. Despite the inviting barn, the dog wouldn't go near it. Instead, he settled by the fence, refusing food and water. Ethan waited on the porch steps, the temperature dropping steadily. He had planned to bed down in his warm house, but it felt wrong to leave the dog outside alone. So he sat there in the cold, watching the outline of the German shepherd silhouetted against the moonlit sky. When dawn broke, the dog was still there, head lowered but eyes open. He hadn't touched the food. Ethan's entire body ached from sleeping upright. Yet he forced himself to move slowly, not wanting to startle the dog. He just poured his first cup of coffee when Claire Thompson arrived at her pickup. She climbed out, carrying a small medical kit. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, scanning the property until her eyes settled on the distant shape by the fence. "Figured you might need some help." Ethan nodded appreciatively. "He doesn't want to come inside. Won't eat. I'm worried." Claire followed him toward the fence line. Each step they took made the dog tense. His hackles raised, ears pinned back. Claire set the medical kit on the ground. "Easy there, big guy," she said gently. "Let's just have a look." The moment she reached for her stethoscope, the shepherd gave a low, menacing growl. Claire froze. "He's been through something awful," she whispered. "It might involve medical trauma, restraints, syringes, anything like that could trigger him." "Then we won't force it," Ethan replied quietly. He gestured for Claire to step back, giving the dog room. Over the course of the day, they tried different strategies, moving the food closer in small increments, offering soft words of reassurance, even leaving a trail of treats in hopes the shepherd would approach. Yet each attempt was met with either guarded withdrawal or a flash of aggression. By late afternoon, exhaustion weighed on Ethan. He had confronted so many forms of brokenness, both in himself and in fellow Marines overseas, but never in the shape of a dog. A wave of doubt crept in. Could he handle this? That evening, as dusk settled once more, thunderheads loomed on the horizon. The approaching storm crackled with distant lightning. The first rumble of thunder tore across the sky, and the shepherd's response was immediate. Panic. He bolted for the fence line, slamming into the wooden rails. Droplets of blood appeared where he'd scraped his shoulder against a post. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, running after him through the swirling dust. Claire followed with her flashlight, the wind picking up around them. The shepherd, in blind terror, sprinted past the property boundary, crossing a shallow creek bed that ran behind the ranch. Ethan gave chase, adrenaline fueling each step. The ground turned muddy under the sudden rain, making every stride uncertain. Flashes of lightning revealed glimpses of the dog's silhouette. Eventually, he cornered himself in a culvert, sides heaving from exertion and fear. Ethan slowed to a walk, arms raised in a non-threatening posture. "I know," he called out, voice shaking from the cold rain and raw emotion. "I get it. I jump at noises too. Everything feels like an attack." The shepherd snarled, pressing himself into the concrete. His eyes flashed with the same frantic desperation Ethan had seen in Afghanistan. But Ethan wouldn't retreat. He stepped closer, not so close as to spook the dog, but enough that his voice might reach him through the thunder. "We can't stay here," Ethan said softly. "The storm's getting worse, but I'm not leaving you." Minute by minute, the shepherd's snarls turned into ragged breaths. Eventually, he stopped lunging. Ethan took this as a cue to sit down in the muddy water, ignoring the misery of soaked clothes. He spoke about his nights of insomnia, about the guilt that gnawed at him, about the fleeting moments of peace he found in Montana's wide-open skies. The storm raged on, but slowly the dog's trembling subsided. In the faint glow of Ethan's flashlight, the shepherd edged closer, step by tense step, until he stood within arm's length, panting. Though still frightened, he seemed to sense the sincerity in Ethan's words. They slogged back to the ranch in the early dawn light, both shivering from rain and exhaustion. When they finally crossed the property line, the shepherd collapsed onto the grass. He was too weary to resist, Ethan gently checking the torn shoulder. Claire arrived moments later with her truck, relief etched on her face. Though they hadn't cured the dog's trauma, they'd passed through a storm, both literal and metaphorical, together. The storm passed, leaving broken branches scattered across the yard. In a way, the ranch looked as battered as Ethan felt. Yet, in that morning hush, something else took root. A fragile connection. One wounded soul recognizing another, each finding a flicker of hope in the other's presence. 3 days later, Claire Thompson showed up with a sealed envelope bearing official military seals. She found Ethan in the barn, laying fresh straw in a spacious corner he'd designated for the German shepherd. The dog watched warily from the entrance, still reluctant to venture too far inside. Claire cleared her throat. "I've finally got something on his background," she said, holding up the envelope. "Took a lot of calls, a favor or two. But here." Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans and opened it. Inside were heavily redacted papers marked with references to the Marine Corps and Special Operations. The dog's real name jumped off the page: Rex. He had been deployed multiple times, each tour more grueling than the last. Decorations were listed, but large sections were blacked out, especially around a 6-month gap. "This is where it gets strange," Claire murmured. She pointed to a block of redactions. "He disappears from official records. No mention of where he was stationed or who handled him." Ethan's fingers tightened on the papers. He glanced at Rex, who crouched near the barn door, ears twitching at the sound of his old name. "Military dogs don't just vanish," Ethan said. "There has to be a reason they wiped his records." Claire nodded. "There's more. I checked with a contact at the Pentagon who said Rex was once part of an advanced training program that experimented with high-stress conditioning." That phrase made Ethan's stomach clench. High-stress conditioning often danced too close to abuse. He knelt, letting the papers rest on a crate. No wonder he's so traumatized. As if on cue, Rex shifted uncomfortably. He seemed uneasy with the two humans whispering in the barn. With slow, careful steps, Ethan moved closer to the dog, offering his hand. They had developed a delicate system of trust. Rex tolerated Ethan now, as long as he approached gently and never cornered him. "I'm going to read more of this later," Ethan told Claire in a hushed tone. "Whatever happened, it doesn't change the fact he's here now. And I'm not giving up on him." Claire agreed, but the gravity of the revelations weighed heavily on them. After she left, Ethan picked up the documents again, scanning the partial service record that detailed successful missions, some of which overlapped with his own deployment dates. A chill ran through him. It was possible he and Rex had been in the same operational zones without ever crossing paths. That afternoon, Claire returned with a small microchip scanner. "He's got an embedded tag," she explained. "Most military dogs do, but I need to scan for any additional devices." The moment she walked toward Rex with the scanner, the dog stiffened, baring his teeth. It wasn't mere aggression. It was a flare of panic, as though he associated such equipment with torment. Ethan crouched next to Rex, whispering assurances. "It's okay. She's not going to hurt you." At length, Rex allowed Claire to approach. She managed to scan the shoulder area, but found nothing beyond the standard chip. However, a subtle metal glint under a layer of scar tissue near the dog's neck caught her eye. It seemed to be a foreign object, possibly buried from an old injury. "We'll need sedation to remove it," Claire said with concern. "And that's going to be rough on him." Ethan glanced at Rex. The dog looked back, almost as if sensing they were discussing him. "We'll do it carefully," Ethan said. "He deserves to know that not all medical hands mean pain." They scheduled the procedure for the next day. As night fell, Ethan pulled an old mattress into the barn, deciding to sleep there so Rex wouldn't be alone. Though the dog remained close to the door, he seemed less fearful of the enclosed space than before. In the middle of the night, Ethan woke to find Rex standing over him, shaking. Another thunderstorm had crept in. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn through the wide-open doors. Without thinking, Ethan placed a hand on Rex's paw. "It's all right," he whispered. The dog flinched but didn't pull away. Slowly, as the storm rumbled, Ethan stroked the shepherd's back, feeling each tense muscle gradually ease. By the time morning arrived, neither had gotten much sleep, but something had changed. Rex followed Ethan to the water bowl, sniffed it, and finally took a cautious drink. It was the first time he'd eaten or drunk in front of Ethan without fear. Later that day, Claire arrived to sedate Rex and remove the piece of metal. The dog resisted at first, but Ethan's steady presence calmed him enough for the injection. The extraction revealed a small ID tag associated with a name that froze Ethan's blood. Major James Harrison, a figure he recognized from whispered rumors overseas. Someone with a reputation for pushing dogs far beyond standard training protocols. As the sedative began to wear off, Rex stirred, eyes groggy. Ethan stroked the dog's head, heart pounding at the discovery. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he vowed quietly. "You're not just some piece of equipment to be discarded." He could never have guessed how dangerous this promise would become or how much higher the stakes would get. But he was certain of one thing. Rex had saved lives once, and Ethan would do whatever it took to protect him now. The following week brought a whirlwind of events that turned Ethan's quiet ranch into a hub of tense activity. First came Dr. Thompson's deeper dive into Rex's patchy service records. Then unsettling phone calls from unknown numbers began, asking if Ethan had a German shepherd with a military background. The local sheriff even came by to mention strangers snooping around the area. One late afternoon, as Ethan and Rex were practicing combi-sensitizing exercises near the horse corral, an SUV rolled up the driveway. Two men stepped out, both dressed in unremarkable civilian clothes, but moving with the clipped efficiency of trained personnel. Ethan felt Rex stiffen at his side. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, voice firm. The first man smiled coldly. "We're from a private security firm. We heard you have a dog that might be suitable for advanced canine work overseas. We're interested in purchasing him." Ethan's jaw tightened. "He's not for sale." The second man held up a piece of paper, spouting some vague legal jargon about the dog being military property. Rex let out a low growl. It was the same growl he'd given in the auction house, but this time it was defensive, not fearful. "He belongs here," Ethan said, arms folded. "If you have a problem, take it up with the local authorities." A flicker of annoyance crossed the men's faces. They exchanged glances, then nodded curtly and retreated to their SUV. As they drove off, Ethan noticed the glare in their rearview mirror. Rex trotted to the edge of the driveway, hackles raised, as if to ensure they were really gone. That night, Ethan called Claire. explaining what had happened. She confirmed his worst fear. The ID tag, referencing Major James Harrison, could tie directly to these so-called security firms. They might be after Rex to silence any evidence of wrongdoing. In the days that followed, Ethan rarely left the ranch. He spent hours with Rex, slowly reintroducing simple commands like sit, stay, and come, but without the harsh edges typical of strict military training. Though progress was incremental, Ethan sensed Rex was starting to relearn the notion of partnership rather than subservience. One morning, a battered pickup rumbled onto the property. An older man with a limp stepped out, James Cooper, a retired Marine K-9 handler who'd heard about Ethan's situation through the local veteran grapevine. He had driven 2 hours just to meet Rex. Cooper's gaze sharpened as soon as he laid eyes on the shepherd. "This the dog from Harrison's program?" he asked, voice low. Ethan nodded. Cooper shook his head in grim recognition. "I served under that man's so-called enhanced training regime. Lost 2 dogs to his methods. Both labeled unstable when they started showing signs of trauma. They were put down." Rex stood behind Ethan, clearly sensing the tension. Cooper knelt, ignoring the pain in his knee, and held out his hand, knuckles first, letting Rex approach. The shepherd inched closer, nose twitching. After a moment, he sniffed Cooper's hand and retreated a foot or so. Not friendly, yet not aggressive. "That's a good sign," Cooper said, rising with effort. "He's cautious, but he's letting me in a little. He remembers the kind ones, even if you're not the same handler." That afternoon, Cooper recounted stories of Harrison's training. Dogs forced into extreme stress scenarios, shock collars used with reckless abandon. Some dogs starved to ensure food motivation. The deeper he went, the angrier Ethan became. He kept glancing at Rex, imagining the silent horrors the dog had endured. Midway through their conversation, Ethan spotted another vehicle slowing at the ranch's entrance. It was Sarah Baker, widow of Lieutenant Michael Baker, one of Ethan's fallen comrades from Afghanistan. She emerged clutching an envelope. "I heard a rumor you have a military dog named Rex," she said, eyes already brimming with emotion. "My husband's final letters mentioned a German shepherd attached to his unit. I think it might be him." Rex, surprisingly, did not recoil as she approached. Sarah pulled out photos of her late husband's unit. In one snapshot, a robust German shepherd stood among the Marines, ears alert, stance confident. Sarah's finger trembled over the image. "That's him," she whispered. Rex sniffed the photo, head tilting, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Then he looked at Sarah, muzzle lowering as though sensing her sorrow. In a heartbeat, he stepped forward and pressed his head gently against her leg. It was the first voluntary, gentle contact Rex had initiated with a stranger. Tears slid down Sarah's cheeks. "He saved lives. Michael wrote about it. Said the dog detected an ambush, but was forced to keep going. Michael always said if we ever found him, he deserved to be treated like the hero he is." In that moment, Ethan realized this wasn't simply about giving Rex a good home. It was a fight for justice, for every dog that had been tossed aside under the cloak of official secrecy. Cooper offered a wry smile. "You're not alone in this, Walker. A bunch of us veterans have been comparing notes. Harrison's got a bigger operation than we realized." Sarah nodded, her grief mixing with resolve. "Mike died trying to protect his team. If this dog can prove how cruel Harrison's methods were, we have a duty to make sure he's safe." Ethan glanced at Rex, who now sat calmly at Sarah's side. "They came looking for him," Ethan said quietly. "They won't stop. That's why we need to end this," Cooper replied. "For Rex, and for all the dogs Harrison hurt." In the gathering darkness, the four of them stood together, forging an unspoken pact. Rex was no longer a cast-off dog with a broken spirit. He was the living testament to a conspiracy of cruelty that was about to be brought into the light. Plans began taking shape as scattered pieces of evidence were pieced together. Sarah Baker produced Michael's journals, meticulously detailing how Rex had warned of an ambush during a crucial mission, only to be punished for disobedience. James Cooper tracked down other handlers with similar stories, dogs showing clear signs of fear, forcibly pushed beyond sane limits. Dr. Thompson compiled Rex's medical records, documenting injuries that indicated systematic abuse. Meanwhile, more strangers seemed to circle Ethan's ranch. Sometimes, they simply sat in parked cars off the property line. Other times, they drove by slowly, as if gauging how best to approach. Rex reacted by growing more alert and protective. This was different from the trembling fear that had once gripped him. His posture was steadier, more controlled. With each passing day, he displayed the traits of a true military working dog: loyalty and resolve, temperaments that Harrison's torment had nearly destroyed. Eventually, Agent Marcus Reynolds from the FBI made contact. He came out to the ranch, flashing his badge the moment Ethan met him at the gate. "I'm in charge of a federal investigation related to Major James Harrison's private security firm," Reynolds explained. "We have reason to believe they've been eliminating dogs to cover their tracks." Reynolds informed them that Harrison had orchestrated a demonstration at a private training facility, showcasing so-called elite K9 capabilities to high-paying clients. "We think he's using these demonstrations to lure investment while quietly disposing of any remaining dogs that don't fit his model," Reynolds said. "If we're going to stop him, we need conclusive proof. Your dog, Rex, may be the key witness." A hush fell over the barn where they had gathered. Sarah clutched her husband's journal, while James Cooper and Claire Thompson listened with grim faces. Rex sat at Ethan's heel, ears attuned to the conversation. It was as if he understood the weight of what was unfolding. "They've already made attempts here," Ethan said, voice low. "What if they escalate? What if they come after Rex again?" Reynolds acknowledged the danger. "I'll coordinate with local authorities for security, but you'll need to keep a close watch. Harrison's men are well-funded and well-connected." That night, under the glow of a single barn lamp, Ethan spent hours speaking softly to Rex, recounting stories of Afghanistan, explaining how he'd once felt just as lost. He told Rex about the guilt he carried over not saving certain friends, about the nightmares that never really stopped. Through it all, Rex remained quietly vigilant. When thunder rumbled from distant mountains, the shepherd tensed but didn't bolt. As the day of the demonstration neared, they planned meticulously. Sarah would pose as a reporter, using her camera to capture footage. Claire Thompson volunteered to attend as a veterinarian consultant, armed with records documenting Rex's transformation. James Cooper arranged for a network of fellow veterans to be nearby in case things went sideways. Agent Reynolds would coordinate with federal backup, but they would only move in once Harrison exposed enough evidence to incriminate himself. On the morning of the event, Ethan loaded Rex into his pickup. The dog hopped into the passenger seat, calm yet alert. Their drive took them to a sprawling private training compound, complete with high fences, obstacle courses, and multiple kennels. The place brimmed with uniformed staff and visiting officials from various agencies and private firms. Harrison stood at the center, exuding confidence as he greeted guests. When Ethan parked in a discreet area, Rex surveyed the scene. The tension in the air was palpable, like the prelude to an operation behind enemy lines. Sarah, wearing a press badge around her neck, checked her camera. "Mike will be proud," she whispered, tears glinting in her eyes. They watched from a distance as Harrison strutted before the crowd, praising his program's results. "Our dogs are second to none," he boasted, detailing how his methods produced unparalleled obedience and performance. Agent Reynolds appeared briefly, giving Ethan a subtle nod. It was time. Ethan led Rex forward, stepping into the line of sight. Harrison's eyes flickered with recognition the instant he saw the German shepherd. For a moment, he faltered in his speech. Then he regained composure. "Ah, Mr. Walker," Harrison said, gesturing for his security to stand by. "I see you brought your purchase, perhaps a demonstration." Ethan held Rex's leash loosely, letting the dog stand at his side. "We're here to show your backers the truth about how you treat these dogs." The hush that followed was deafening. Harrison's face hardened. That dog was government property. He was labeled unfit for service due to aggression. "I'm sure you're aware of that." Sarah stepped forward, camera rolling. His name is Rex, and he served with my husband, Lieutenant Baker, saving lives. He was punished for responding to an ambush he tried to warn you about. Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd. Officials exchanged glances, uncertain whether to trust Harrison's charismatic aura or the evidence Sarah was capturing on film. Rex's calm demeanor under pressure contrasted sharply with the idea that he was unfit. Without warning, Harrison signaled a handler holding a shock device, the same tool they used in enhanced training. A high-frequency whine cut the air. Rex's ears flattened, a brief flash of fear, but Ethan's reassuring hand on the leash steadied him. Instead of cowering, Rex held his ground. "That dog is defective," Harrison insisted, voice tinged with desperation. "You'll see. He won't obey." But Rex was no longer under the yoke of terror. He looked to Ethan for guidance. Ethan spoke a single command: "Rex, stay." And Rex stayed, unshaken by the shrill device. The crowd watched in stunned silence. A few security personnel, clearly uncertain, glanced at Harrison, who was losing his grip on the narrative. Suddenly, Agent Reynolds stepped into view. "Major Harrison," he announced, brandishing his badge. "You're under investigation for allegations of animal cruelty, evidence tampering, and multiple counts of misconduct. We have federal agents surrounding the compound." Panic flashed in Harrison's eyes. He threw down the shock device and reached for a hidden weapon. In a heartbeat, Rex responded with the precise training he'd once used on the battlefield. A swift lunge, disarming Harrison without mauling him. A controlled takedown that ended with Harrison pinned. The demonstration crowd erupted into chaos. Some of Harrison's men tried to intervene, only to find themselves confronted by plainclothes federal agents. Sarah's camera captured everything. From the moment Rex refused to cower to the final instant Harrison's weapon clattered to the ground. Then it was over. The threat had passed. Rex released the subdued Major and stepped back to Ethan's side, battered but whole. For an excruciating moment, the yard fell silent, as if everyone was absorbing the sight of the courageous dog that refused to be broken by cruelty. When the dust settled, the revelations about Major James Harrison's program rippled through the military and beyond. His arrest led to a thorough investigation of private security firms exploiting retired military dogs. Thanks to the cooperation of people like Ethan Walker, Sarah Baker, James Cooper, Dr. Claire Thompson, and above all, Rex himself, the truth came to light. Rex's story became a cornerstone in advocating for better protections for military working dogs. Congressional hearings took place, and new legislation required stricter oversight of training programs, as well as guaranteed health care and humane treatment for retired service dogs. Military protocols were rewritten to reflect that these dogs were not mere equipment, but fellow soldiers who deserved dignity and care. At Ethan's ranch, Rex continued to heal. The nightmares that once plagued him lessened. He roamed freely, greeting visitors who came to learn about kinder, more transparent training methods. Over time, the ranch transformed into a modest rehabilitation center where other traumatized dogs and their handlers could find solace and guidance. In the end, Rex's scars told a story not just of pain, but of resilience. He had been used, mistreated, and nearly discarded. Yet, with Ethan's steadfast dedication and a community determined to right past wrongs, he reclaimed his identity as a guardian and a partner. Their journey proved that no soul, human or canine, is beyond saving. For everyone who watched them, the message was clear: compassion, understanding, and unwavering loyalty can mend even the deepest wounds. And in that shared healing, soldier and dog alike found the strength to carry on, no longer defined by brokenness, but by hope.